It's my pleasure to introduce Matt Oppenheim. He's here to talk about Watershed Worlds, Indigenous Paths to Planetary Survival and Resilience. So this moves very well hand in hand with Carol's presentation. Matt is a fellow at Society for Applied Anthropology, and he's the author of journal articles, book chapters, magazine articles, etc., on educational innovation, diversity, watersheds, and ecological communities. Matt has an MA in Applied Anthropology and a PhD in Transformative Learning and Change. He is a transformative anthropologist, having assisted transformative community processes with the Mayans of Guatemala, worked in public education and with many nonprofits. He's also teaching anthropology at several universities. So Matt's passion for watershed research and action began in 1991, first researching the Murray-Darling watershed of Australia and then becoming a watershed educator in California. He was the founder of an ecological primary school in Australia, and he's also the author of To Color a Warrior, an ecologic adventure novel. This sounds something I would love to read. Currently, he is the director of the Blue Ridge Watershed Institute, an emerging watershed-based educational project in the Upper French Broad Watershed in Western North Carolina. So it's all about the water, Matt. Welcome to our forum. Please, the floor is yours.
It's so good to be with this group because just from listening to a little bit of the previous presentation, I can feel we're really like a family. And this is coming together to work more effectively for our lovely planet. And I want to ask those of you who are not sharing your video, please share your video. I do a lot better if I see people's faces and their gestures and hand gestures and everything. So, and I have many lifetime friends on this presentation. So it'd be great to see you all. Okay. So welcome to my presentation. You can see behind me, it's a painting by my mother in 1947 of a Arkansas watershed up in the rural mountains. And she always loved yellow ochre. For her, that was mystical energy. So I think the water is represented by yellow ochre. Okay, so let's start my presentation. We live in a very, very unnatural, urbanized and capitalistic world where even all these amazing alternative systems that we're coming up with can become the opposite of what they're intended to be. And this is symbolized by what's going on with hurricanes in Japan right this moment. They have, they're a very mountainous country, and they have these huge solar arrays that cross mountains. They've denuded the mountaintops, and they don't look very healthy. Anyway, they're producing a lot of Japan's solar energy. And here's an example. I don't have to explain much about what's happening with a lot of them. The hurricanes come, and the solar panels are washed down the hill. Look at all the green that's washed down with them, all the topsoil and the plants and everything. And then, of course, in many cases, they're washing out villages. People are dying. Okay, so I wanted to dramatize just the point that when someone may seem to be very alternative and very progressive and very transformational, it may not be. Okay, and my kind of foundation is that the watershed is kind of our measuring stick. You know, of whatever works with the watershed is pretty sound. And then if we look at any kind of technological innovation or plantation system, if it works with these ancient watersheds, it's going to be doing pretty well. Here's just another example of the absurdity that's happening in Lebanon right now. People cannot access water. They seem to not have their own available water. They can only buy it. And the same with electricity. So what's happening is the super rich get as much as they want to, and the impoverished people are beginning to die. So that's another absurdity that if we don't address inequality, we're not going very far. So here we are at my book page. It's called Watershed Worlds, Indigenous path for planetary survival and resilience. In this photo, I hope some of you recognize it, is Shirakawa Go, a watershed community. It's a World Heritage Site in Japan, and I'll be getting into this later if you don't know what I'm talking about. And here I like the kind of mystical aura of the painting because it's all about worlds. It's all about plunging into a completely different world than we're experiencing now. And that's the thesis of my book, that I'm going to show you some marvelous indigenous examples that have been following the same methods for 8,000 years without seeing any changes. So that really shows us a true way forward. And I love to say the forest is longing for the sea is longing for the forest. I believe that's kind of an anthem for us all to follow. In Japan, the fisher people go to the forest and plant the trees and nurture the soils so that when the water comes down, they have nutritious soils and rich water for marine life. So for me, I started writing this book 4 years ago, and I knew watersheds were important, but it really, really shifted my whole view of life, my day-to-day experience, and how I live in the world by looking at these very deep systems that I'm going to show you. And that's what I'm asking people in the book. I hope it's a transformational process. I have poetry and song and a lot of visuals, and it's academic in walking the path of these watersheds. And for me, as I walk around anywhere, wherever you are right now, you're immersed in a watershed. Everything that you see around you is produced from a watershed, probably from China, but nevertheless in a watershed. Anywhere you look outside is part of a watershed. And a watershed is not just the water that's flowing, which a lot of people assume. It's absolutely everything, right? Because the mountains, the plains, our cities are all found in a watershed paradigm. So the purpose of this talk is to help start our transformation. And you've already started by mentioning indigenous people based on the ancient indigenous practices, establishing what things lead to civilizational collapse or resilience. And then really the goal of my book and the goal of my project is what we're all talking about here at the conference. I think it's an amazing time for synergizing all of our movements holistically all together. So here you are and your planet. I want to introduce you. We live on an incredibly watershed-based planet. This is a special satellite imagery that's been colorized by this amazing geographer, Robert Does. And I have my URL there that you can look at. You can actually find a picture of your own watershed, no matter where you are in the world. And if you look maybe more deeply than just the watershed, you can see it's all the mountains and valleys and plains and marshes and everything that's part of it. So I show that to my college students to kind of shock them in a way because I ask, do you feel comfort in living in this? Is this your reality? And then I show a photo of a normal map, right, with highways and cities and locations like that. And we say, yeah, that's our map because that's the map of the world we live in, right? Almost all of us will want to go somewhere, fly somewhere, meet some friends. We use roads and things like that, right? We don't really. So this is going to help you merge more with the actual watershed. So what is a watershed? This is an idealized watershed, but it shows you all the ingredients. It goes deep into the ground with aquifers, underground lakes and reservoirs, canals. It goes far above with the cloud cycle and the rain cycle, but it is literally everything on the land and around the land. And the flow is always from the mountains, the high mountains, down to the sloping areas, to the plains, out to the deltas and marshes, and out to the oceans. So this is a really good way to introduce kids or people of any age into beginning the process wherever you live. Now, I'm going to help you through a little bit of a cognitive shift, an ontological shift, as we saw with that other photo, away from our normal world that we travel in into a totally different experience of the world. And this painting is based on a pilgrimage of 13 Pueblo native artists who and drove through their entire watershed, starting at on the Rio Grande River.